Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Scott Garber back with the Profluent Sport podcast, where we are highlighting founders, executives, advisors across the whole sporting landscape. Today we have a very exciting conversation ahead of us as women's sports continues to dominate the headlines and emerging leagues are popping up everywhere. We couldn't think of a better guest to bring on, but that is pioneering the Women's Pro Baseball League. Today we have the co-founder Keith Stein in the hot seat. Keith, my man, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good to be with you, Scott, in the hot seat. How are you?
Oh man, life is good. Life is good. I get to sit over here and learn about all these exciting new endeavors that are popping up across the sporting landscape. And so today is very much in line with that. So, Keith, just, for all of our listeners, just a little format, we're going to get to know you and learn a little bit about Justine, your co-founder, and how you guys came up with the idea for the Women's Pro Baseball League. We'll learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing. And then most importantly, you're going to educate us on all the exciting things on the future. So Keith, let's get to know you a little bit. How did you find yourself in this position building out, the only women's pro baseball league on the market right now?
The only one in North America. It's going to be the return of professional women's baseball. It hasn't been around since the 1950s. So really excited about it. Since we launched about 4 months ago, we've been everywhere from CBS, New York Times to Saturday Night Live. So the coverage and support has been incredible. We've had over 800 players, some of the best players in the world already register with the league. But how this came to be is, I'm not a baseball player. My co-founder, Justine Siegal, is quite legendary. And I wish she were on the podcast. She's way more interesting than I am. Justine is the first woman to ever pitch to an MLB team. She is the first woman to ever coach a professional men's team. So she's just a great pioneer. And she dedicated her life to this mission, creating a platform for women. It's crazy that there are all these leagues out there for women right now, but when it comes to America's pastime, there was no league until we came around. So this is long overdue. Really excited about it. How this really came to fruition. I reached out to Justine. The light bulb went off in my head a while back, and I was researching it and working on it. I happen to own a local baseball team in the city where I live, and so I've been really exposed to baseball lately. And I want to come back to, if we have time, Scott, because I'm doing something really interesting with my baseball team in Toronto, where I'm based. So it's a men's team. And for the first time, we have hired a woman who's going to pitch for the team. She's one of the most famous women players in the world. Her name is Ayami Sato. We're bringing her in from Japan. So I've been involved in all these things and trying to push the envelope to promote women in sport. I was interested actually in buying a franchise for Toronto in the Professional Women's Hockey League. My friend was the owner of that league, but it just didn't come together. So this is an opportunity to do something I believe in, promote women's sport. I love baseball. I'm involved in baseball, but to work with Justine and to do something that we think is pretty historic and cool here, it's fantastic.
Really cool. And we're going to take this sort of two directions, Keith, right? We're going to talk about the business of the emerging league and how you're, sort of building this from the ground up. And then to me, and this is where I'm going to start the conversation, is traditionally in North America, young girls all the way to women now playing professional have gone the softball route. So I'm really curious, in women's pro baseball, is this the same rules as men's pro baseball? Is it the same field size? Sort of give us a crash course on the education of what the framework of the game looks like that these ladies are playing in.
It's the same game with a couple of little tweaks, which I'll come to in a sec. But first, I want to note something, because you said something that's important. A lot of women play softball in the U.S. A lot of young girls play softball. That is a historic byproduct. About 100 years ago, it was thought that women weren't athletic enough, that hardball wasn't suitable for women. So they were pushed into the softball game. Softball's fantastic, right? But they were not given the opportunity to play baseball, to play hardball. We know that there are a lot of great softball players who are also great hardball players. For example, we just signed up Alex Hugo, who's one of the most famous female players in the country, and she is a great one of the premier softball player and hardball player. She plays for the American national team, and now she's guiding us in terms of recruitment and player development. So there's just massive interest in the hardball game. There are over 2,000 young women who are playing on men's high school teams right now, right? I mentioned how many players from around the world have already signed up with us. So the talent pool is really, really deep.
Oh, very cool. And when we think about emerging leagues, grassroots development is one of the key things, right? We need to be able to go ahead and have a pipeline of talent that comes through this. And so, Keith, do you envision, starting up at the pro league and then starting to have like developmental baseball leagues for women downstream, or will you start to pick talent of athletes who are playing in other sports that could potentially do really well and with a simple migration into, the hardball league?
I think we're going to start with the hundreds and thousands of hardcore baseball players who exist now, who are ready, just can hit the ground running. So they are great players, and they're not all in the States. A lot are in the States. They're going to come from Japan. They're going to come from UK. They're going to come from Canada. We have a lot of players coming in from Australia. So there will be imports, but you just asked something that's an interesting twist. Players from other sports. I suppose that's possible, but they'd have a steep learning curve coming to baseball and competing with all the women who are playing at the international level. It's very developed. Now, the other thing you touched on, the developmental infrastructure or the lack thereof. We hope and we believe it's going to happen that our league is going to spawn the development of a whole baseball developmental system, that pipeline that doesn't exist now, that will result, we believe, from creating this league that's going to give little girls, when they're young, all the way up, something to shoot for. So this is a really important platform for the whole game, and we want to create a baseball culture for women. And one already exists, but I think we can really expand it and help it to flourish.
Cool, really cool. Now let's dive in. So you and Justine have this vision of we're going to build the platform for this to start to take life. Keith, give us a peek behind the curtain. What was that like? What were the business conversations that got you excited about pioneering a new league? Sort of with your existing tenure of owning a team up in Toronto. Was there very similar parallels that you were able to pull from, or was this a completely new experience? Well, what has that been like?
Okay, so first, when it comes to Justine, this has always been her dream. She's been thinking about this long before I ever entered the picture. But my background is I'm a lawyer. I haven't practiced law in decades. I've mainly been a businessman, investor, and entrepreneur. So I'm quite entrepreneurial. I've been involved in a number of different businesses. I love creating. For me, the most exciting part about business, I like making money, but I just love the creative part. So a couple of years ago, I went into a friend's backyard and saw a paddle court. I don't know if you're probably familiar with paddle.
Very familiar.
This is more than 3 years ago. I had never seen a paddle court. I wasn't familiar with the sport. I walked in that court, fell in love with it. My entrepreneurial wheels started spinning, and I realized that paddle is the fastest growing sport in the world. Yep. I thought, okay, there's a real business opportunity here. And I launched the world's only and the first professional paddle league in North America, which is called the Pro Paddle League. It has 10 teams, and I had never done anything like that before. And that's why business is exciting, because you just have to develop all these new muscles and power through things. It's very challenging, and you're learning constantly. Scott, I want to tell you something. Yep. I made every single mistake in the book, getting that league off the ground and helping it to develop. I also did some good things, because 3 years later, the league is doing well. The Pro Paddle League has 10 teams, right? And it's really got strong tailwinds right now, tremendous momentum. But I acquired all of this knowledge, a very unique skill set. Like, how many people in the world do you think have started a professional sports league? Maybe it's 500, maybe it's 1,000, but it's not a lot. And it's not like they teach courses on this.
Sure.
So I'm in that small group of people that now knows how to create a sports league, especially after, as I said, making so many mistakes. Like, one of the biggest mistakes I made in the Pro Paddle League was not being smarter about owner selection. So owners can make or break a league. You can have the greatest idea. You can be well capitalized. If you don't have good owners, it can really fuck things up.
Yep.
Is swearing okay on this podcast, by the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're here now, Keith, so fuck it.
So I wanted to I wanted to take everything I learned from the Pro Paddle experience and apply it again. But I never thought, what are the odds, of finding another sport where I could apply my skill set. And then, because I had this exposure to the local baseball team, and I'm always sort of thinking in an entrepreneurial way, the light bulb did go off, and I thought, wow, baseball, like the biggest sport in the country, no professional league, they're leaguifying everything right now, like the most obscure sports that are emerging. When
Yep.
I was starting the Pro Paddle League, you know what the most challenging part was? Calling prospective owners or investors, and the first question often was, "What's paddle?" Right? Or, how are you going to do this? No courts. Well, when it comes to baseball, everybody understands baseball. There's tons of facilities out there. The ownership interest has been incredible. So this time with the Women's Pro Baseball League, there's an opportunity for me to take everything I've learned and work with someone who's smarter than me, and Justine. Because she's not only got high baseball IQ, but she's just super smart generally. And we can create something here that is going to be so thoughtful from the get-go. I know now with Justine how to create the right foundation and how to select the right ownership groups. But I also want to respond to something you asked. The game itself, I said there's some tweaks to it. It's the game we all know and love, but we will play with aluminum bats.
Yep.
So there's going to be like some serious home run action. And same size diamond, all of that is the same, but we will likely be a seven inning format.
A little bit more condensed, a little more consumable. And
Yeah.
we see that, right? Like, especially if we want to cater to a younger audience, right? I think that's something that we're watching, leagues and trying to speed up the game in different ways or condense it to make it more suitable, both for the traditionalist, but also the emerging sport fan as well.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting. I want to go to your, we're touching on the ownership side of things here, Keith, right?
Yeah.
And, very familiar with the Pro Paddle League and what you've rolled out there. So will you take a similar approach, and do you have strategic cities that you're going to roll this out to and sell franchises? Is this going to be something that you guys all own and operate for the first season and then you'll sell them off? What is that methodology as you guys start to take this league to market?
There are essentially two models when it comes to building out a new sports league. There's the single ownership or single entity model, where we own and operate everything. You don't have a bunch of individual franchisees, or that's the other model, where you sell teams from the get-go and you have a bunch of different owners who become your partners, essentially. There are pros and cons to both models. The advantage of having a single ownership model is that you can avoid some of the clusterfucks that you get into with owners in early stage leagues. You also can ensure that there's parity among all the teams, that performance is optimized. You can also optimize value, because the business of sport is a great business. This asset class, and I think there's some inflation out there, and there might be too many sports leagues. And when I say too many sports leagues, it's not there's not a place for them, and it's not they won't find distribution. I just don't think they're all going to become billionaires overnight, right? It's just there's only so much support that can go around. So the single ownership model is interesting because of the things I just mentioned. You can ensure that you really optimize the performance of each team, that you've got the best possible management in place. You lose control of that. If you sell an individual franchise to someone in Pittsburgh, that person's autonomous, right?
Yep.
He or she has to work in conjunction with the league and the league rules, constitution, etc. But there's a fair bit of autonomy, and you're at the mercy of that owner. If that owner is not just first rate. We have offers right now from groups that want to be our partner in a single entity model. With that model in place, Scott, with that partner or partners, we would operate the teams ourselves, probably 6 teams, which we've announced we would start with in 2026 in the Northeast. So teams are going to be clustered together. You want to have in a new league, especially, well, it applies to many leagues. You want to avoid airplanes.
Sure.
Cluster the teams as much as possible so teams are a bus trip away from each other. That is more efficient, obviously. But the other option, we have a lot of support. A lot of people have approached us, have made offers to buy individual franchises. And why it's tough is we lean towards the single ownership model, but it's a tough issue for us to resolve quickly, and we're taking our time because it's really important not to rush with sports league. I made that mistake before, just rushing because you're in a hurry always to sell teams, and you're worried about someone else going to compete with me and start another league. It's not the right mindset. So we are struggling with this issue because some of the owners who've made offers to us now to buy individual teams are as good as you get, right? They're best in class. They would be best in class ownership groups, but they want the individual franchisees So we're still open to that, and we actually have a bit of a gun to our head right now because even though I just said we have to take our time, we've been slow playing things with six different groups. So it's not fair. At a certain point, we have to land on a certain model. So we will be doing so soon.
How exciting, Keith. Like, I mean, the timing of this conversation, I think that, you get people typically at ideation of a league, and then, there's that build where you're sort of heads down in stealth mode, and then it comes up and that infrastructure is in place. I know for ourselves at Profluent and our listeners, it's really neat to get this perspective, right? Because now you're making decisions that will ultimately impact the trajectory of where this league goes and how it stands up. And, I think it's just really interesting to hear sort of firsthand how you guys are thinking about navigating that opportunity, is what I'll call it, ahead of us, right? And so one thing that I'm genuinely curious about is, like, with that cluster in the Northeast that you guys talk about, are you looking at partnering with existing infrastructure to go ahead and get the team off the ground? Or are these going to be, eventually own stadiums that will house the women's pro baseball? How do you guys think about that from a real estate side of things?
So you need the real estate to run a league. And again, what I learned from my previous professional sports league experience is that you really have to focus on the real estate and the economics around it. So you're not blowing your brains out trying to rent places and stage an event for a couple of weeks. You want some permanence. It's much more efficient if you can have facilities that are continually hosting your games in the first couple of seasons. First off, let me say that the venues we are targeting are roughly 2,000 to 5,000 seats. We think that's our sweet spot. We have ownership groups who want to be our partner in the single entity model, who own their own facilities. We have ownership groups who want to buy an individual franchise, who have their own facilities. That is a prerequisite. So we are not going to be paying, the league isn't going to be paying for temporary events at someone else's facility. There's a ton of facilities. There's no shortage. And all of these partners we're going to work with, or might not work with all of them, but the ones we end up working with not only have their own facilities, but they have all of the infrastructure. So all of these groups have their own front office that manage, many of them already in the baseball business. So they have their own baseball operations people. Again, in the last league, everything had to be built from the ground up. Someone who bought a team didn't have any infrastructure in place.
Sure.
Because we're talking about the sport of baseball, not a new sport, it's good. It's very advantageous. We can tap into all of the baseball infrastructure, assets, talent, and know-how that's already in place.
It's got to be a relief, right? Where you don't, it might not look like such a tall mountain to climb, starting from the ground up, both from an education perspective on what the sport is, but also having existing infrastructure, I think allows this to scale a lot quicker. Keith, I'm curious, we've watched, some of these emerging leagues leverage stardom and celebrity to try and help drive eyeballs and attention to what's going on. I'm curious, because women's baseball has not, been around, right? We've typically gone down the softball path. How do you guys think about, bringing this out to the masses as you guys roll out in your first season?
I'm glad you raised it. It's part of the playbook now, I believe, for any new sports league, because we live in a celebrity obsessed world, and celebrities are important lightning rods, I think, for not only new sports leagues, but teams. So it's important to us to embed celebrities in the WPBL at the league level, and there will be celebrities at the league level. And it's important to me that each team should also have its celebrity quota. So you've seen Tom Brady's and Serena Williams and the whole, they've become sort of the usual suspects because they're not only one sport celebrities. They could be attached to a pickleball team or an NFL team. And that's not going to stop. It's really a smart thing for the celebs to do, because typically they're getting free equity. They're leveraging their celebrity. So we've already started those discussions with a number of people. But I should tell you, Scott, again, trying to do things a little differently than I did them last time. Some of the things I couldn't do last time because it was a bit of an obscure, a fast rising sport, but still fairly obscure in North America. This time around, for example, we've had 16 different production companies approach us and pitch us on doing a docuseries, documentaries. And we're very close to now finalizing a deal with one of the largest groups in that space. And that deal will not only encompass a docuseries, which I think is really important. Exposure is important.
Huge.
Making your league sexy and cool with celebrities is important, but having that sort of broader exposure through a docuseries really critical. And this group we're going to be partnering with is not only going to handle, because they're so large and they have many tentacles, we're going to be able to close a deal that not only provides WPBL with a docuseries on a major platform, but there will also be a distribution/broadcast deal for
Very
this
cool.
league very early on, not way down the road. We want to get that in place as soon as possible. And this group is also, because we have started to build out our front office, but it's not nearly where we want it to be. This large media group would also assist with everything from sponsorship to merch. So there are things like that we're doing that are, so it goes beyond just getting celebs this time around. We will have celebs for this league. We will have, I think, certain celebrities who are attached to our docuseries as executive producers and as hosts potentially, or spokespeople. So
Very
there's
cool.
like a whole bunch of things we're doing to ramp up the exposure for the league.
That's really neat, man. And it's neat to watch the playbook. This isn't your first go around, right? So now you're able to go ahead and learn along the way. But the playbook is becoming more tried and true as we watch more emerging leagues continue to pop up. And I think that storyline of getting to know the players, right? We watch an Angel Reese and a Caitlin Clark, and when you feel like you know them, and then we can create some controversy, now this takes on a life of its own, right? And so there's multiple examples like that across the board. But, Keith, I'm curious, as women continue to apply and you build out these rosters, talk to us. Is this a lucrative endeavor for a woman who's playing professionally? Like, what does that look like from a salary wise, situation? And yeah, maybe we'll just stop there. I'm just curious, like, what that looks like.
It's not lucrative enough. So I'm just being honest. The baseball players, because there hasn't been this sort of opportunity for them, right? So we are now creating this platform, and we're going to do the best we can to elevate compensation for the players. But the reality is, a lot of the players are going to make something that would, a wage that would pale in comparison to the Professional Women's Soccer League or the WNBA or Professional Women's Hockey. We will catch up.
Sure.
But the market isn't there yet. It's in our league's best interest to pay our players. We want to be paying them what Caitlin Clark is making, because if we're paying our players that much, that means our league is making a lot of money. Our franchise owners are making a lot of money. It all works in sync like that. So our players will make probably $250 to $500 per game, and then we will cover all of their living costs, transportation costs, but we will do everything we can to keep moving up that comp ladder. There will be certain star players. There are some baseball players who are very well known, and those players will make a lot more than the majority of the players on the team. But generally, it depends on the number of games we play, but the roster comp is probably going to be in that $100K to $150K neighborhood. That's if we play a 40-game season in 2026. I should also mention that, publicly we've announced our plan is to start in 2026, but because of the interest we've received and certain offers we've received, in fact, I might be closing one of these deals later today, we have one baseball group that would like to host a mini season this calendar year.
Wow.
So we started really delving into that. So there could be, and we've talked about 6 teams in 2026. We could have a mini 4-team season this calendar year, and it looks like it would take place in October.
Hey, let's go. A lot to be on the lookout for in a short amount of time, Keith. You guys have your hands full. I'm going to go away from the pro league for a second and just focus on you. You're a serial entrepreneur. You've built, in multiple sports. Keith, where do you go to learn and stay sharp? Do you have mentors? What books are you reading? Always curious, how you stay relevant in the space to make sure you're making the best decisions as you're scaling this league.
Okay, so it's really interesting question because staying current is and and being sort of plugged into the broader zeitgeist, knowing what the trends are and where things are going. It's not easy because we live in such a fragmented media world right now. It used to be that you could like get a snapshot of what's going on from one source. So I'll tell you is it's always been very important to me to more important than reading books, and I love books, but I spend about 2 hours every single day. I'm really disciplined about not a lot of things, but I'm really disciplined about this. I will not ever have a day where I haven't spent about 2 hours reading everything.
Wow.
So consuming as much news as I can, but the news and information I consume is not just right now. I'm very involved in sport, but I'll read about fashion and business and politics and everything I can because all the dots connect for me at least, and they help stimulate my thinking. So I just think you have to consume as much information as possible, as broadly as possible, but don't make the mistake that I see a lot of people making right now, where they get all of their information from, let's say, social media or one social media channel, and then they think they know everything. Be cynical about the information you're consuming. Always question whether or not you're getting quality information. So information to me, consuming it, reading, is something that keeps me really sharp. And I'm just someone who has always been really energetic, and I just need stimulation. I can't not do things, so I've always got to have projects. I started off as a lawyer in law school. I knew there's no way I'm going to be a lawyer, but I just didn't know what else to. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't know what else really to do. I didn't love school, but I thought, okay, I should have some sort of training. So I picked law, and then in law school, I knew, okay, this is like too boring for me. And then I gave it a shot working at a law firm. I thought I'm only going to do this for a short time to see if I can make what I learned in law school useful and practical. And it served that purpose, but I realized working in a law firm that you're just that there's that Don Henley song, lawyers worry about small details. That's a lyric in this song, and that always haunted me. As a lawyer, as a young lawyer, I was working on small details all the time and other people's details. I said, fuck, I want to work on my details, and I don't mind working on my small details, but I want to be in the Keith Stein business. So as soon as I could find an exit out of law, I found one I wanted to work. I really was interested in the capital markets and public companies, so I found my way very quickly into one of the largest public car companies in the world. Is called Magna. It's the largest auto parts manufacturer in the world with about 150,000 employees, and I became the right-hand guy to the founder, who was this brilliant but eccentric fellow, and I was with him for a long time. And so you asked me about mentors. I learned what not to do from him in a lot of ways, but I also learned a lot of good entrepreneurial lessons. But after being there for a while and doing well I got to senior vice president like pretty quickly as a young person, and I got stock options, so I was able to amass enough money to serve as a foundation for more entrepreneurial activities. I wanted to go full-time into the Keith Stein business, and that's when I made the pivot out of that fully into Keith Stein entrepreneurial mode, where I was investing, and I don't want to bore you, did a lot of entrepreneurial things. One of the most fun things I did was I bought Krispy Kreme Canada in 2000 with some partners. And why I say it was so fun was that, when you're involved in business, like when I was at that public company that produces parts, what are people going to talk to you about?
Yeah.
What sort of widget the company produced today? By the way, when I was at that company, this is a real digression, but because I was the right-hand guy to this crazy founder, I was the guy who had the keys to the castle and everything else. So we had 5 private jets, and we had golf courses everywhere and all these resources. So people called me because the founder was in his ivory tower. So I arranged for Bill Clinton to open up our golf course, and it was his first golf course event after his presidency outside of the U.S.
No way.
But Do you remember the movie Tommy Boy, which I have a feeling
Yeah,
you're going to say you love, right? They called me and they wanted to use, we had hundreds of factories. So I arranged for that. And if you ever watch Tommy Boy, at the end in the credits, it's special thanks to, and it says my name, Keith Stein.
How cool, man.
But Krispy Kreme was fun because people would say, charities would call me all the time and say, Keith, can we have 1,000 donuts for some event? Or my friends would call for free donuts. So I was so sad when I got an offer I couldn't say no to from private equity in 2019. But I really loved it. But I've always tried to do fun things since leaving that public company. Gene Simmons from KISS has been a really close friend and partner of mine. And when cannabis was becoming legalized and it was becoming like the biggest phenomenon, now it's not. Like it's in the capital market, it's sort of a dirty word.
Yep.
But Toronto was the epicenter of cannabis finance. And I was the founder of a company that grew to I think of about a $450 million market cap. But that one doesn't talk about that. But what I am proud of what I did in cannabis with Gene. Do you remember, Scott, when people like Snoop Dogg and Martha Stewart were doing these deals, they were aligning themselves with cannabis companies?
Sure.
Well, I cut a deal for Gene, and that cannabis company paid us $12.5 million.
Oh.
It was the high water mark. So Gene and I were just high-fiving because we were so happy. We had set the bar really high. And it's so much fun being an entrepreneur, doing all this crazy stuff. And I've been driven to do things because I just have that type of motor in me. And right now, when I stick my teeth into something, I become like super focused and super passionate. I don't need anyone to kick me in the ass. I do that to myself. This Women's Pro Baseball League, I think it's the greatest thing I've ever had the privilege of being part of. I have 2 daughters. I think we can have such an impact on you have a young daughter.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that we're creating this platform now that's going to inspire young female players, give some of the best players right now who don't have an opportunity to play elite baseball. This is going to be a home now for elite baseball players where they can hone their skills, they can show the world what they have. And I think women's pro baseball is going to be one of the most exciting, compelling sports products in the world.
Man, I'm fired up. And, my daughter she was sitting on my lap before, when you hopped in here on the podcast. And I think it's so neat, the runway, what's on the horizon for women in sports. I feel like we're just in the first inning, for a baseball analogy, of like really what's to come on the, the opportunities and the commercial opportunities that should have been in place long, long ago. But here we are, right? Nothing like the present. And Keith, I think as a fellow entrepreneur and a lot of folks that listen to this podcast, you're insatiably curious. And I think that's important, we have to be maniacally focused on what we're building, but we have to stay very curious about everything that's going on around us. As, sports is one of the last pillars that brings all humanity together. It's a universal language that cuts through all the other noise, but I think it's very important to stay relevant on what's going on in the other noise to make sure we show up in the right way, with the right tone, with the right messaging. And, Keith, you and Justine seem to be embodying that. For anybody that's listening that wants to learn more about women's pro baseball, Keith, where do you go to do that?
Go to womensprobaseballleague.com. Go to Instagram. Those are the 2 main channels right now. We're everywhere, but start there.
Fantastic. Well, listen, the floor is yours for any parting words, and then we're going to take this one home. So anything that you want to leave the audience with?
No, if you're a great player out there, sign up with us. We'll be having probably a training camp in the spring. Our draft isn't until the end of the year, but stay tuned because, as I alluded to, you're going to probably see some type of mini season in the fall of this year and lots of announcements. So we just signed Alex Hugo that I met, who we're going to be signing other great baseball players who are going to be supporting our league. And we talked about celebs, so you'll also be hearing about some great celebrity announcements in the not too distant future.
Can't wait, man. And look at everybody that's listening. This is what Profluence stands for. It's all around evolving, innovating, and driving sport forward so that we can continue to just create a great ecosystem of participation, which creates better humans. Keith Stein, my man, I thank you so much for taking the time and sharing the wisdom and the journey of what you guys are building. And be sure to tune in next time for the next episode. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Keith.